Step five is probably the one that people are the most afraid of. A lot of us are really, really scared of it. A lot of us are very intimidated by that. It's really hard for me to put into words. It's really hard for me to describe the feeling of freedom and lightness that comes from that. Are you most afraid of admitting it to God, to yourself, or to somebody else? And unanimously, it's to somebody else, which is a really interesting thing to me.
Hey Tim, it's good to see you again today. Last time we spoke,
Michael.
we were talking about the 12-step program, and we talked about step 1 and 2. I wanted to reconnect with you today and move to step 3, and possibly, if we have time, step 4 and 5 as well. So tell me about step 3. What does it involve?
So step 3 is where the verbiage is, we've made a decision to turn our lives and our wills over to the care of God. And so if you remember step 1, we admitted we're powerless, that our lives are out of control, our lives are unmanageable. Step 2, we came to believe a power greater than us could restore us to sanity, could help us make our lives manageable again. And then in step 3, we make a conscious decision to submit and to surrender to that higher power, right? So we can kind of summarize 1, 2, and 3 as 1 is I can't, 2 is he can, 3 is I think I'll let him.
Okay.
So it's kind of this bridge between step 2, which is believe I can be restored to sanity, and then step 4, which is really the first kind of external action. So 1, 2, and 3 are all kind of very internal, but 3 kind of serves as that bridge between, okay, now I'm going to move from internal contemplation, introspection, belief changing, thought process changing into, okay, now I'm going to go out and start doing something about it. So it kind of serves as a really good bridge between those.
Because you had said that in our previous meeting that often people are in denial for a really, really long time. So once they admit that they are powerless, step 3 is the step to give that power to God, to something greater than themselves.
Yeah, so I believe it's page 60 of the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, it says the first requirement is that we be convinced that any life run on self-will can hardly be a success. And so we kind of think about, okay, I've been running my life up to this point on my will, on what Tim wants, on what Tim desires. And, that really hasn't worked out very great for me so far. And so now I'm going to get out of self-will and I'm going to voluntarily submit and surrender to my higher power's will.
So then from this bridge, step 3, what then does step 4 entail?
So step 4 is we've made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. And so basically we can kind of summarize or think about that as, each one of those words, they obviously mean something, right? Words mean something. So we made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. And so searching and fearless being, I am looking as inward as I possibly can at all of the things of my life, right? So if you think about any successful business where they sell anything or they some kind of system, they've got to take inventory once in a while and say, okay, this is what I've got on hand and this is what I don't, and this is maybe what I still need. And, I've got way too much of this. And we kind of do the same thing. And so we take an inventory of, okay, what are some of the behaviors that I've done as a result of my addiction? What are some of the ways I've hurt people? What are some resentments that I have? What are some fears that I have? What am I dealing with as far as character defects? And it's a really interesting practice because, you end up with, when I did my first inventory, they tell you to write it down, on a piece of paper, but I don't know if there's enough paper in the world for mine. And so I did mine on Excel, because I had to have a bunch of lines and stuff, which makes me sound really bad, but that's okay. You take stock of, okay, well, whenever I was in kindergarten, I pushed Sally down on the playground and I did that because I was jealous. Okay, whenever I was 15, I, maybe had a girlfriend that I left her for another girl, and I did that because I was insecure. And so you start to see these character defects that pop up time after time after time, and they start to kind of establish a pattern. And you can look at these character defects and say, okay, guilt is really ruining my life. Anger is really ruining my life. My pride is really making a lot of decisions for me. And so you just take that inventory of everything about you, and you end up with this big list, basically, of all the reasons you kind of suck as a person. And so it is an uncomfortable exercise, but I think that there's a lot of good that can come out of that, because when we know what our defects are, and when we look at how we have used our own hurt and our own resentments and our own fears to hurt other people, when we know what those are very intimately, we can start to move away from those. We can start to say, okay, man, Michael, we're forming a relationship. Now we're friends and growing in how we know each other. And I've had friends in the past, and I really let my anger get out of control, and it really impacted those relationships. And so I'm not going to bring that into this relationship, right? And I wouldn't know that if I didn't take inventory of it, right? If I didn't take stock of it. So it's a really, really important exercise. And I think people in general, but addicts and alcoholics especially, man, we don't like to look inward. We don't like to look at our character defects, because those mean, one, that means if I look at it, that means it's real. And again, going back to denial, it's very strong. And so if I look at it, it's real. And then two, and maybe even worse than that or harder than that is, well, now I've got to do something about it. Now I know my ego is out of control. And now I know my pride is out of control. And so I can choose to either kind of continue living that way or move away from that.
So for you, when you took stock and you created your spreadsheet, essentially, the detail, you said you had a lot to detail. Is that something that for you could do in one session, or is it something that takes time? Because that's, like you said, it's got to be difficult. And while you're uncovering these truths about yourself, that must be when the guilt really flares, or where these other feelings really flare.
It definitely can, because if I look back at my inventory and I say, man, in high school, I really did this, or in college, I really did that, and that guilt hasn't been resolved, yeah, it can bring up a lot of very unpleasant feelings. And what I find is a lot of us are really, really scared of our inventory. A lot of us are very intimidated by that. And so the question of, how long does it take? It does take some time. It does take some time. And not because it's necessarily difficult or confusing or complicated. It's just, if I'm looking at my past, or if any of us are looking at our past, we come up with these things, that guilt, that shame, that, oh my gosh, I can't believe that happened. That the regret, that brings up a lot of feelings. And so while it's not a complicated exercise, the emotional tax that it can take can be a lot.
That step, you mentioned the step was for your journey as an alcoholic, and this is the step for alcoholics. But you also kind of touched on that, and I agree that perhaps everybody should be doing step 4 if they don't. I don't know about the other steps, but everybody should do step 4. And at some point in their life, I've found through my journey in life that people that I encounter that get stuck in a pattern in their life continuously point outwards from themselves. So they continue to blame the world for the things that are going wrong in their life, instead of looking at that they are the central focus of their life. Like it has to be something to do with them.
Yeah, there's a guy that I love so much. His name was Father Joseph Martin. He was a Catholic priest who was really, 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 really outspoken in the AA community back in the 70s, 80s, and kind of early 90s. And he had this story that he told one time when he was talking about exactly what you're talking about. And he said this adult couple who was watching their young cadet, he was in the Army or Air Force or something. They were watching him march at his graduation with 4,000 other graduates. And one of the parents, if it was mom or dad, I don't know, but one of them kind of said, man, look at that. Isn't that great? 4,000 cadets, and our little Jimmy is the only one that's in step, And so it's like this idea of, man, if everybody else is doing it a certain way, maybe I'm the problem. Maybe I'm the one that's out of step. But we don't like that.
No.
We want to look at the other 3,999 and say, man, you guys really need to get it together around here.
I think the other challenge in that, though, is the idea of normal or normality. It changes. It's a moving target. What's accepted nowadays would not have been accepted as a social norm 20 years ago. The way people dress, the way people act, the way people communicate. So normal's a really odd concept to me. What do you think about the idea of normality?
Yeah, normal is definitely definitely an interesting thing. That's in therapy. I always ask people, because they'll say, now that I've gotten sober of this addiction, I realize it took 20 years of my life or 5 years of my life. I shouldn't be where I am now. And I always just ask them, I said, according to who, man? It's normal for you is going to be very different from normal for me. But going back to step 4, I think that's why the word moral is so important in that step. We made a searching and fearless moral inventory. It doesn't say normal inventory, because there is morality in the world. There is an inherent sense of right and wrong. And so I think even if we're doing something that's quote unquote normal, we know if it's right or wrong. We know if it's moral or immoral. And normal can definitely be subjective, but moral, maybe not as much.
Yeah, that makes sense. So then after you've made this inventory and you're contemplating step 5, what does step 5 involve?
Step 5 is probably the one that people are the most afraid of. So step 5 says we admitted the exact nature of our wrongs to God, to another human being, and to ourselves. I'm sure I butchered that and somebody is just going to waylay me, but that's okay. It's a confession step. That's really what it is. We admit to God, we admit to ourselves, and we admit to another human being everything that's on that inventory. I took that Excel spreadsheet and I sat down with the guy that I did my 5th step with, and we went line by line. Here's where I hurt this person. This is the emotional reason I hurt this person. This is the outcome of that hurt. And we just went line by line. And there's a reason we have to admit it 3 times and in 3 different kind of venues. And the question I get most often is, why do I have to admit it to God and myself? God was there. He knows what happened. I was there, certainly. I know what happened. Why do I have to admit it to myself? And I think so much of that just comes down to all the way back to step 1. We have to admit these things. We have to admit that these things are real, that they happened, that they are in our past. And even more than that, when we admit them and we say them out loud, we know that they can't be changed. As much as we would like to, as much as we pray for change of our past, can't happen. Everything that we have ever done, said, thought, felt, whatever, all of that stuff will have happened in the past. And so we have to get really honest about that stuff. And I always ask people, are you most afraid of admitting it to God, to yourself, or to somebody else? And unanimously, it's to somebody else, which is a really interesting thing to me. I get where they're coming from, but I think if I'm going to admit all of my wrongdoings to my God, that's what I should be scared of. But unanimously, man, it's admitting it to another human being. But that's the one that's so important because it breaks isolation. It allows us to really be seen without the mask of, this is the version of me that I want to present to you. This is who I want you to think I am. You just lay it all out there and you say, man, this is who I was. And that's an important distinction, right? This is who I was. This is what I used to do. This is how I used to think and how I used to hurt people. I think there are very few things that build humility like that kind of blunt honesty. All of the steps, they're designed to take out our ego, right? They're designed to take out our idea that we have it together and we can run life. And I think step 5, that's probably none of them more so than step 5.
That level of ownership, it's very difficult, I think, for anybody.
It is very difficult, but there's that cliche of burden shared is a burden halved. And I always tell people, it's really hard for me to put into words. It's really hard for me to describe the feeling of freedom and lightness that comes from that. Because if we were to sit down and I were to give you my step 5, invariably there's at least a couple of things on there that you would say, oh my gosh, me too. And I'm not the only one. I'm not the only one that's dealt with this or perhaps done that or thought this way. And so there's this feeling of actual connection and getting away from isolation that addiction just has such a tendency to do to us. And there's a level of freedom that just comes with putting yourself on full display and just saying, you know what, man, this is me.
We were talking about it. I went through an inventory of things in my head where I remember when I was younger and maybe I was bullied and maybe I was a bully or maybe this happened. I did a little inventory and I was like, yeah, that's not great. That wasn't a great Michael.
Yeah. That's the thing is we as a society, not to get super preachy or existential or anything, but we as a society have a tendency to show only the good parts of us. If you got on my social media, there's pictures of my kids and they're smiling and they're beautiful and they're perfect. What you don't see is me yelling at them like, shut up and smile 2 seconds before that really perfect picture. And so you don't see that version. But everybody that we will ever know in our life, we all have a past. We all have things like that. Maybe I was a bully, maybe I got bullied, maybe this happened or whatever. We just don't show that. And for sustainable recovery, we have to show that, because we have to learn to be honest with ourselves, with God, and with other people. We just have to. And that's what it takes.
Well, I believe that's the only place that really in-depth relationships can come from, because if somebody doesn't really know you, doesn't really know the real you, how can you ever have a really intimate connection with them? And even just small things in life, you were talking about how you present yourself in life. I went to a function last night, and before I went, I was like, I really don't want to go to this, because in my role as a business owner, when I do these networking events, I'm really an introvert person, but I have to play extrovert for me because it's part of my role. So playing extrovert, not super comfortable. Now, when I get there, I'm fine, but there's always that little bit like, I don't really want to do this. I don't want to be around lots of people. I don't want to talk to these people. I don't want to interact with people.
Yep.
I want to stay home where it's comfortable and safe.
I just want to wrap up in a blanket.
Yeah.
But what do you do when you get there? You put a smile on and you're like, yeah, I would rather be nowhere else than right here with you guys. This is wonderful.
Yeah, I had great interactions, and some younger guys I really like wherever I can act as a leader in some way, and these younger guys were talking to me and we had some great conversations, and hopefully that was impactful in some way. It was for me. As always, it's been very enlightening for me, and we will connect again to go through some more steps. I want to thank you very much for your time today. Great.
Yeah, of course, man. It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure.
Right.
Take care.
Yeah. All right.